Welcome back to America Decides and our continuing coverage of the Republican National Convention. Tonight, the spotlight is on two big topics: foreign policy, national security. And in that conversation, let's be honest, there are questions still about Donald Trump and JD Vance, his running mate, and their statements that some have interpreted as admiration for authoritarian leaders around the country. Speaking of JD Vance, here he was on Face the Nation in May when pushed on his praise for the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban.
Well, look, I'm not endorsing every single thing that Viktor Orban has ever done. I don't know everything he's ever done. What I do think is on the university principle, the idea that taxpayers should have some influence in how their money is spent at these universities, it's a totally reasonable thing. And I do think that he's made some smart decisions there that we could learn from the United States.
CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan joins me here. Margaret, foreign policy, national security, always fundamental in any presidential election, sometimes behind the economy, some distance, sometimes really close, but it's a big factor tonight. The indictment against Biden is that he's weak, and Trump is strong, and basically that's what people here want the country to know. Evaluate that contrast, strength versus alleged weakness.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that when we look at JD Vance and try to assess him, we have to look at things he said because he hasn't really been in the Senate very long.
1.5 years.
Exactly. Yeah. And he doesn't have a foreign policy worldview other than this very staunch opposition to aid to Ukraine. Not consistent, though, when you look at other U.S. allies, very much for aid to Israel. But his argument in that, when he's talking about denying Ukraine, is that the money's better spent elsewhere. So it's not on the principle, right, of the conflict itself. And you have to look at some of the things he said and try to understand his worldview. The reason we played that clip there is because JD Vance was describing and praising some of the things that this leader of Hungary has done, including trying to take control of universities, put them under the control in a foundation run by his cronies. And it's something that JD Vance has praised. And it's something that the American conservative movement that he is really representative of on the populist front has said is the way things should go. And it's interesting because in this country, you've seen a version of that grow out of the Gaza war, the Israel-Hamas war, this argument that American colleges have gotten too liberal. They're soft. The young people are soft, and we have to fix this. And that's reflective of this echoing of what we're seeing in Europe with some of these right-wing leaders being, elected democratically, but showing these authoritarian tendencies. Viktor Orban has really reined in journalists, the judiciary system. He rewrote the Constitution. So we have to look at things like that and say, what does that indicate about what he wants to do if he's in office? Contrast that with a very, very traditional foreign policy, national security view of Joe Biden.
Margaret, please let us pause for just a moment because at the podium, Peter Navarro, who arrived here this afternoon after being released from a federal prison for being held in contempt of Congress. Let's listen to Peter Navarro.
Thing about the Constitution, they demanded that I break the law because they have no respect for it. I refused, and a Democrat majority in the House then voted to hold me in contempt. All right, what happened next? The next jackboot to drop was the executive branch. Another one of your favorite Democrats, Democrat Attorney General Merrick Garland. There's a winner. Him and Jack Smith indicted and prosecuted me for criminal contempt of Congress. Now, here's what's weird about it. It's something that Democrat prosecutors refused to do against one of their own, including two guys with blood on their hands, Eric Holder and Alejandro Mayorkas, the great border czar, right? They've actually gotten people killed. For decades, the Department of Injustice right now, the Department of Justice policy stated, hear me out on this, if Congress slaps a subpoena on a senior White House advisor like me, the advisor's duty is to politely tell them to go pound sand.
Just to put a point on this, Congress does have oversight authority. Congress can issue subpoenas, and if you ignore a subpoena, in some circumstances, you can be held in contempt, and in Peter Navarro's case, serve some time for that. Margaret, back to national security and foreign policy.
That was the China advisor.
That was
China
the China advisor. So tell me what you think about that and Peter Navarro's potential role in a future Trump administration. Should there be a second term for former President Trump?
Peter Navarro was universally opposed by anyone who had any experience working on Wall Street or working in economics. He was a PhD in economics, but really sort of defined most things around tariffs. And by the way, what are you hearing right now from JD Vance and Donald Trump? And a little bit of populism on the left as well, with Joe Biden adopting some specific tariffs targeted towards electric vehicles. But that was the solution for everything coming from that point of view. And once again, JD Vance, I've interviewed him and asked him about that. He said, wait, Donald Trump has said everything from a 10% to a 60% tariff. What is the point of view? And aren't you just going to make things more expensive because that is a tax for consumers? And he was just wholly dismissive, argued, look, the American heartland was destroyed in 4 years. It's not going to, in longer than 4 years, you can't rebuild it in 4 years. And so Donald Trump was only halfway through the job fixing it. And all these policies are going to somehow bring manufacturing jobs back to America that left America decades and decades ago. So it's a rebooted version of the Peter Navarro message.
And very quickly, Margaret, on that question of tariffs, as you said, it's a tax on imports. They are passed on to consumers. And if inflation, which I've heard every night here, is a big concern, how do you factor that in?
Right. I mean, the reason that President Biden adopted the tariffs on electric vehicles made in China is to discourage you from purchasing them and make it less financially, to destroy the argument that it would be a cheaper alternative to an American-made one, right? That is acknowledging it's going to cost you more. Right. That is what a tariff does. That just is the basics of it. So what does a Vance-Trump administration do? We'll see. And if they get elected and put other advisors in there who push back on some of the policies like we saw in the first administration.
Interesting to see it tonight if JD Vance mentions the word tariff. And if he does, how many times? Margaret Brennan, thank you so very much.